Do you guys remember all of those leaks saying that Apple is working on a foldable iPhone? Well, we have it. I present you the foldable iPhone. Fully working. Some of you might have seen this already, some of you might have not, but I'm thinking that all of you are probably quite confused. So what is going on? Well, I'm going to address the three main questions that you might have. 1, what it is. 2, how did it get made? And 3, what does this mean for Apple? Number 1, let's take a look at what this thing is. As you probably know, Apple has not released any actual foldable iPhone yet. So the one that we've just seen in this video is actually not a foldable iPhone made by Apple. It's also not a prototype. In fact, it is a passion project made by China-based YouTube channel Aesthetics of Science and Technology, or AST to be short. And they've spent close to 1 year making this foldable iPhone. They've used a number of third-party components to get this to work. And they posted a video on YouTube, close to 17 minutes long, detailing the entire process. So let's take a look at the second question. How did they actually get this to work, and how did they make it in the first place? Because when you think about it, it sounds like impossible. Like, even if they designed all the casing and, the folding mechanism from scratch, the motherboard doesn't bend, so how do you get that to work? Then the display also doesn't bend, so how do you get that to work? And on top of all of this, iOS is simply not made for foldables in the first place. Whereas in their own video, they were showing features such as multiple window support and side-by-side multitasking, which is something that we do not have on iPhones today, and this foldable iPhone apparently had. Of course, there were lots of major challenges to overcome, more specifically 5 main ones that they did have to overcome, and in the end, they seem to have managed to do so. The first challenge being the display. So they used an iPhone X display in order to do this. Now, the iPhone X display doesn't fold. So to be able to make it fold, they removed the glass, which doesn't bend, and the 3D touch layer, which also doesn't bend, leaving just a flexible OLED panel, which does bend to a certain extent. Now, separating the glass and the 3D touch panel from the overall display unit, in 99.9% of the cases, it causes the OLED panel to break, because that panel is just very sensitive, so anything you do to it will likely cause it to break, and in that case, we'll see plenty of dead pixels, white spots, and stuff like that. So they claim to have done this over and over and over 37 times until they were finally able to do it, separating the layers whilst keeping the OLED panel intact. Perfect for this quote-unquote foldable iPhone. And apparently just the display process took them 5 months to get right. Now, the second challenge is the hinge. How do you make such a hinge from scratch? Well, it's simple. You don't, because it's really, really difficult. So instead, you use something like a Z Flips hinge. But apparently, because the Z Flips one bends at a very tight angle, they were not able to use that because it would have simply broken the iPhone X display. So they ended up using the Motor Razor's hinge that folds at a wider angle. And in that case, the display of the iPhone X could actually fold this way. The third challenge was the motherboard, which, as you probably know, is simply not foldable, and you just cannot bend it in any way, as you can actually break the components on it. So what they did is they actually split it. They used the motherboard on the bottom and then the battery on the top, and then they used some special third-party connectors which were longer than the ones that Apple uses and also flexible, unlike the Apple ones, which simply break if you try to fold them. The fourth challenge was just getting a chassis, a custom chassis that can, fold and do all of this. And in that case, they 3D printed this enclosure. And of course, the fifth challenge is just getting iOS to recognize everything. The custom connectors, the custom battery, which, by the way, they had to use a smaller battery, a 1000 mAh battery due to just the size, and they had to jailbreak iOS to get everything to work, apparently. That's pretty cool, and they also did the side-by-side multitasking thing through the jailbreak. So that looks really awesome when you think about it. A foldable iPhone that works and was made by someone other than Apple. So I've watched this video a couple of times, and I don't know. I feel like there are a couple of weird things about it that might imply that the whole thing is actually fake. And here's why. So they used an iPhone X display and an iPhone X motherboard. But at the same time, the camera on the back was a triple lens camera module, which was really weird. Because again, on the inside, they had just 2 lenses. So I was thinking that, okay, they simply just 3D printed the triple lens camera module just to make it look a bit more modern. As if you take a look at the lenses, they all looked fake, so they all looked like just dummy lenses. But then at the same time, they also showed the camera to actually work, which was really odd. Then they also skipped most of the detail as to how they got the motherboard inside the 3D printed case and how they got all the components to work, which, keep in mind, this is by far the most difficult thing to do. And this is also the thing that they skipped on almost entirely. They had plenty of displays and prototypes to show us, but nothing in terms of how they got all the components to work and play nicely with iOS. And I also think that the timing is quite odd. So in the title of the video, they say that it took 300 days. But then at the end of the video, they say that it took 200 days. And what's even weirder is that apparently the display itself took 5 months, or 150 days. Which means that they only had 50 days remaining for the most difficult things: the motherboard, the hinge, the 3D printed chassis, and all the iOS tweaking. I don't know, but to me this timeline seems a bit off. Something else that looks off is the 3D printed chassis, which, keep in mind, this was fully 3D printed, and we've 3D printed components ourselves, and they just look, well, they have that obvious 3D printed look to them, but this one looked very finished. In fact, the frame looked as if it was made out of stainless steel. A bit way too finished for a 3D printed product. So my theory here is that it is likely fake, that's what I think, and that they simply used a Galaxy Z Flip in a custom iPhone body enclosure, essentially a snap-on enclosure that would give it an iPhone-like look. And then they simply applied an iOS skin. There's a lot of third-party Android skins available, and some of these actually mimic iOS, the look and the feel, almost one-to-one. In fact, some of the fake iPhones that we've had, and we actually made videos on those back in the day, those actually had a very believable iOS skin. And to the general public, I don't think anyone would be able to tell that this is just an Android skin rather than true iOS. But hey, if they actually did do it for real, then major props to them. But okay, what does this all mean for Apple? Is Apple still working on a foldable phone? And when is such an iPhone coming? Well, we do know that Apple is working on one. We've seen plenty of patents, plenty of reports, and plenty of leaks that Apple is indeed considering this. In fact, back in January, Dylan DKT, who's by the way now blocked on Twitter, but before he got blocked, he reported that Apple is testing multiple iPhone prototypes. Furthermore, a more recent report from CNBC from 2022 October claims that Apple will be releasing a foldable iPad, not iPhone, but iPad, in 2024, and that they will be releasing a foldable iPhone afterwards if this iPad does well. They claim that that's because such an iPhone would simply cannibalize the sales of all the other iPhones, which are already very expensive. And for Apple to be actually able to differentiate the two different iPhone models, the foldable and the non-foldable, they would have to price this thing at over $2,000. And in that case, most people would simply skip it. So if they do release a foldable iPad first, I would say that it makes the most amount of sense for the iPad mini to become the foldable iPad. Of course, the main issue would be the price. Such an iPad would be very, very expensive. And the iPad mini currently is one of the least expensive iPads that you can buy. But I think price aside, it does make a lot of sense, since if you take a look at the Galaxy Z Fold 4, when unfolded, it is almost the same size, display-wise, as an iPad mini. Plus, I do believe that a foldable tablet that fits in your pocket is way superior to a phone that just folds in half. That to me is simply gimmicky. You can already fit that phone in your pocket, it's just that it's a bit more compact now, whereas with a tablet, you just cannot fit it in your pocket unless it folded. But do let me know your thoughts on all of this, and do subscribe for more interesting Leaks Rumors episodes like this one hopefully was. I'm Daniel, this is ZONEofTECH, and I'll see you guys in the next one. ZONEofTECH, signing out. Cheers.